last week, or I guess it was on Monday, excuse me, and came out with flying colors, and we'll look forward to working with him as he comes on board here with the Transit Authority. Would you stand and join me in repeating the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll next go to a very important part of our meeting, and that's our Safety First Minute. And I understand we have somebody standing in for Dave. I don't see Dave here. So go ahead and introduce yourself. I know who you are, but to others.
Good morning, Chair. I'm Sheldon Shaw. I'm the Safety Manager for UTA. Go on. Test. Sorry. Good morning. I'm Sheldon Shaw. I'm the Safety Manager for UTA. Chair, trustees. I was asked to give the Safety Minute for today, and my Safety Minute is to slow down. And the reason for that is about half of all crashes, speed is a contributing factor. If we control our speed, we can prevent crashes, or we can reduce the severity if there is a crash that happens. If you elect a speed, some of the downsides to that, or you have less time to react, you have less control over your vehicle, you increase your stopping distance if you're speeding. You also increase the severity of the crash if you do speed. And finally, remember, speed limits are a maximum, not a target. So appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm thinking my wife gave you that Safety Minute, right? But thank you. It is an important piece, so good reminder. We'll next go to approval of our November 28th minutes from the board. Now, is it the 28th or the 12th? December 12th. I must have an old sheet. That's probably my problem. The agenda that I have is from before. Yeah. Okay. No worries. Okay. We're good. So the minutes, approval of the minutes from November the 12th. Or December the 12th, excuse me. I'll entertain a motion for approval of those minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. This is Beth Holbrook. I'd like to make a motion that we approve the minutes from December 12th, 2018 as written.
Second, any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. We'll next go to our public comment period, and Bob, do we have anybody?
Yes, we have one public comment that came in via the internet. It's rather lengthy, so I'm going to do a summary, and you'll get the detail. Okay. That's from Anna Beckstrom. First off, she wanted to thank the board for the transit service, especially front runner and bus. She had several concerns, one about front runner delays, another one about seating capacity during peak periods, and the third was temperature control in the cars. Sometimes it's too cold in the winter, sometimes it's too hot in the summer. And finally, she wanted to thank us for the safety presence on front runner and the bus. As she said, I've never felt unsafe and appreciate the train host and the police officers.
Great, thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll move forward to our agency report. We have on the phone today, and I failed to announce at the beginning, Steve Myers. Steve is actually in town. He's just not feeling the best, and we welcome Steve. And Steve, do you have anything in particular that you wanted to report?
Thank you, Chair. Just one item this morning. Between the two meetings that we had between December 12th and today, we were approached by Rocky Mountain Power with a time-critical item to execute some documents regarding a grant they were providing us to assist us with electric bus infrastructure. It was a good thing. It was an increase of the grant from $400,000 to $500,000, and using the emergency power that you've granted me, I did go ahead and execute that grant. That's all I have for today.
Great, thanks, Steve. That is great news, and we appreciate Rocky Mountain Power's partnership in this important project to the agency. Next, we'll go to item 7 on our agenda, which is our November financial report, and go to Bob for that presentation.
Thank you, Chair. We'll start with the dashboard. As you can see, year to date, we're favorable in most of the areas. The one area we're unfavorable is on the diesel price. We've seen that for some time. Prices have started coming down again. So we'll see where we end up at the end of the year. As you look at the operating expense, even with that higher fuel cost, which is about $1.4 million in actual expense, we're still $4.3 million under budget. Well, as far as ridership, we were about even in the month of November. For the year, we're about 2% down. And again, sales tax continues to perform well.
Can I ask a question on
ridership?
Sure. Is there any thought as to sort of why it stayed down versus stabilizing maybe a little more toward the end, or does that have to do with new service?
Well, we're seeing an increase in service in Utah County through the UVX, and there's been sizable increases. Timpanogos is up about $515,000 for the year, whereas in Salt Lake, our bus and rail's down about $1.4 million. So that's been the offset that's helped slow that loss down in the last few months.
Okay.
Take a look at sales tax. For the year to date, we're running 7.6%. The December collections were about average, about 4% increase. So we're down just a little bit from what we reported to you last month. The Tooele number is up quite a bit. That's because of the implementation of a new tax. As far as the operating expenses, this is by mode. You can see we're favorable in several areas. On light rail, the reason we're a little bit over budget is because we have some capital expense that hasn't yet been transferred over to capital. It's residing and operating, and that'll get transferred over. That's about $1.7 million. Commuter rail, the biggest reason for that being over budget is diesel cost. That's about $700,000 of that number. And I should have written it down. I think the other parts is parts in the commuter rail.
But Bob, once you transfer over the capital portion of light rail, where does that sort of leave it in regards to, is it still over budget, or does it?
No, it should be positive at that point.
Okay.
And commuter rail, I do expect it to be over budget for the year, mainly because of the diesel prices.
Okay.
Again, you can see that we're favorable in many of the other areas. Some of that in paratransit, for instance, is due to mobility management. We had planned on some expenses that just haven't happened. Those things are still under consideration. And then in administration, we've had legal costs that are less than expected, as well as some public relations, marketing, and in the GM's office or executive director's office now, we've had been under budget there for quite a bit.
Can I ask one question on the bus? So the bus uses, well, I guess it uses a mixture of natural gas and diesel. How does the bus sort of find itself in the favorable and the commuter rail? Does commuter rail just use that much more diesel?
Bus uses a lot of diesel, obviously, so that's been working against the groups. What I've got on this page is Ogden's saved about $500,000. There's about $500,000 under. So we have the groups that are also looking at their miles per gallon and how they can create efficiencies there. So that helps offset some of the fuel price. And then we budget for every position being filled every day, and that obviously doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so we'll talk about that on the next slide when we talk about line items. So looking at line items, and I'll start at the bottom, wages and benefits, that's one of the big things that help us offset some of those costs. And then in the services area, 1.8 million of that is professional technical that we planned on transferring out to capital projects. Well, we didn't spend it, so it's not getting transferred out. So up in the other, at the very top, that includes that 1.8 million of expense that hasn't been transferred out. We didn't incur it. So it shows up in two places. Fuel, we'll see that we're about $1.4 million over budget. Again, that corresponds to the price mainly. Then utilities, that's mainly propulsion power. And that is a quick tour of the November financial statements.
Any questions?
Yes, just a quick question. Bob, can you just, for clarification's sake, what does propulsion power actually mean?
That's the light rail electricity.
Thank you.
Well, if there are no other questions, I'll entertain a motion to accept our November 2018 financial report.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the November 2018 financial report as presented by staff.
Second, any other discussion to that motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes. Next, we'll go to our annual transit-oriented development report and real estate inventory with Paul Drake.
Thank you, trustees, Mr. Chair. I'm Paul Drake. I'm the Senior Manager of Real Estate and Transit-Oriented Development. Here to briefly discuss the annual TOD report and real estate inventory for last year, 2018. The reports are required to be submitted. Do I have rights to the slides? Okay. Anyway, so this is the report. These reports are required to be submitted to the board every year. Executive Limitations Policy 2.2.4, which is our TOD policy currently, requires that the Real Estate Department describe the status of all active TOD projects, as well as the readiness of potential TOD sites. This year's report doesn't address the readiness of TOD sites. That is based off of a tool that is still under development, but it's about to be concluded. And in fact, we'll bring that to the board for discussion sometime this month. The Executive Limitations Policy 2.2.2, which is the real estate policy, requires that the department provide a portfolio of the agency's real property, including all non-transit properties and transit supportive properties. The actual report is included in the board packet. It's lengthy. It's a big spreadsheet, but I want to hit the high points of that report. For the TOD annual report, there are 4 listed active TOD projects. Active project at Provo Intermodal Center that's not listed because we haven't broken ground. It's still in the early design phases. But the active projects that have broken ground are Sandy Civic Center, Jordan Valley TOD, South Jordan Front Runner Station, and 3900 South Track Station. Among those 4 active projects, we have completed or broken ground on 9 development phases. That includes roughly 760 residential units, 570,000 square feet of office, 35,000 square feet of retail, 192-room full-service hotel. So what does that mean for the communities and the agencies? It equates to nearly $300 million in private investment in our communities. UTA has invested around $19 million in capital. That includes excess property and sales proceeds from prior TOD sales. Our return so far is roughly $21 million. And we've also received $7 million in parking at the South Jordan Front Runner Station.
Can I ask a question on that?
Please.
And is the extent of our capital investment on those properties, is there any more sort of capital calls that we'll have to contribute more, or is basically our core investment done?
Our core investment's done.
Okay.
Yeah, we're fairly protected from capital calls. One more detail here that might show up. So basically what we have done is put in 11 million in land, and we've sold some of the projects that we've done with our development partners, and 8 million of that has been reinvested. So our initial investment was 11 million.
Okay.
We've received 21 million and reinvested some of that. So that's how that's reflected in those numbers.
And it looked like, though, there was still some development that could occur in
Plenty.
some of these projects. So
Yep.
the potential return's not done yet, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, we're not even halfway through on these projects. So, as I mentioned, the real estate inventory is included in the board packet. Won't go into that detail, but the main points is that we are managing and own nearly 2,300 acres of land at a book value of nearly $430 million. Do you have any questions?
Well, the one question I have is on the in that land area. It seems like a lot of it's right away for transit
Correct.
operations, which is totally understandable. You wouldn't use it for much else
Right.
besides that, or ancillary at best. Is there much in the way of surplus stuff you had to buy and just aren't likely to use, or are you able to differentiate?
Yeah, we do differentiate in the report. There's not a whole lot that's excess or surplus.
Okay.
We categorize basically anything that's used for transit as a transit critical purpose. So that would be park and rides, that would be administrative buildings, any kind of storage, any of that. So a lot of it, you're right, is corridor, but then there's transit supportive properties. There are a few that have been deemed surplus, and we're looking to either sell those off. There are other ones that have been identified as having transit-oriented development potential. Those ones we hold on to and work with the communities, as you're aware, work with the communities to plan out those areas and get them prepared for development.
So in those right-of-ways, I apologize, I had to check and make sure I was on. In those right-of-way areas that you're developing for the future, for instance, in Box Elder, where that's primarily what the focus is, it's just simply the purchase of the right-of-ways at some point to be developed. How is it that, what type of things are we looking for development? If you could just kind of highlight those again, just really briefly, so that there's an understanding of that, that would be great.
An understanding of where we're trying to preserve property.
Yeah.
The main areas where we're trying to preserve property is where we know that there's a future transit need and that there is funding identified. So you mentioned Box Elder, where we in the long range plan, we intend to go north that way, and so we're looking for opportunity buys as we go north. That one's interesting because we do have limited funds, and so it's a kind of a long-term play. We work with several folks to try and identify what are the high priority sites that we need to acquire now. Those are if a developer is coming in and wants to develop where we need to build track, we will work with that landowner to preserve that right of way in the future. We're also looking for areas where land is inexpensive right now, and that would be in the agency's best interest to purchase it now rather than when development heads up that way. We're also acquiring land, as you know, Provo. We have some one coming to us, but that's a project that's finished up, and we will soon be looking to acquire property for the Weber County BRT. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Sure.
And just to kind of highlight, those areas specifically are really directed in a lot of ways by our community partners as well. And so their input is obviously critical. I mean, you mentioned that, what you consider to be a transit site, obviously that would be input from that community or that area. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, we do get a lot of input from our communities. One thing that I did fail to comment on is that in our long range plans, we look to enhance our existing corridors. So there's some places where we look for opportunities. If we do intend to double track, we'll try and pick up those. But we do, like you said, work with the communities and get their input on those acquisitions.
Thank
Definitely.
you.
And Paul, you mentioned our efforts to go north. I always, I'm trying to remember for sure, but it seems like we own the right of way to Payson. Is that true? And we just haven't constructed, or is it
We own some right of way to Payson. There are gaps in there, and that's another instance where we're working with communities to try and fill those gaps. Okay. But yeah, we own quite a bit of right of way going down south.
Okay. All right. And then I think you were on a slide looking for an action, if I remembered right.
No action. This is just an information item.
A motion to accept. Okay, thanks for that clarification.
Thanks.
I'll entertain that motion to accept the report.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the annual transit-oriented development report and real estate inventory as reviewed by staff.
Second, any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next is a resolution establishing the authority's organizational structure, appointing officers and setting compensation for district officers and employees. And it lists my name here, so let me just give some background to this. Yesterday we had a great opportunity, or I should say Steve and I did, to meet with the managers of the organization, and we, I think Beth would probably second this, as we've gone around and meet with all the business and operating units. We are very fortunate as an organization with a lot of capable managers who work in each of the business operating units and who are working at finding efficiencies. I think was pointed out in one of our financial reports, or in our financial report, but who are looking for different ways to improve the organization. And so it was really a great month and a half as we spent a fair amount of time doing that and getting a handle for ourselves. And also looking at the legislation that modified the board structure to a 3 full-time member board, and what that role is in regards to the executive director, executive director versus the historical president, CEO, or general manager, or different titles that had been held in the past, and where that individual had both an outward and I would maybe phrase it inward focus, and what our role is as a board in both managing the organization and also equally important in our work with outside stakeholders, the communities in which we operate, certainly state officials, our role and responsibilities to the governor who's appointed us, and the state who has and the taxpayers, most importantly, who've invested in the organization, and how that could best be accomplished in that effort. And as we've had those discussions and furthered that discussion, recognized a need in the executive director's position going forward to have that position looking more inward than outward. Clearly would have outward interactions and discussions and collaborations with partners in the community, transportation, and other partners in the community, and don't intend to diminish that fact, but a very inward focus on the operations of the agency and the, oh my goodness, sorry. But the focus on the operations and working in an unsiloed way as we work on projects going forward, and just the day-to-day operations and the synergies that come from that day-to-day operations, that it was necessary to do some restructuring and to also look at one of the things that we have experienced both in our prior roles as elected officials and in my prior role as an appointed official, communities' desires to look at long-term strategies of how does transit interact with their community as they look to redevelop a community. How is that best done in an effective way that you can that they can plan for long-term infrastructure improvements and investments, and as they look for opportunities both with internal funding as well as through county, state, or federal opportunities that come, having some clear cut plans that would give them some guidance and us as an agency guidance about how that investment could and should take place. Recognize the need to create a service development piece that's not really new employees, although there is a new chief position. Thank you for doing that, but a chief of development services that would have that particular focus, not only in looking at capital opportunities, but in the service development of the agency as we go today. And it's not a grand expansion, and it's not like capital investment has stopped prior to this. I think I know I was involved in with my role at Salt Lake County in some investment in the double tracking of the S line, and that work is underway. I know we've heard very positive responses on the BRT construction and now operations in Utah County, and so capital hasn't development hasn't stopped, but a focus that is within one particular area and bringing those parties together. But it's going to take interactions with those that operate it, those that are funding it, as I look to Bob, and making sure that those are in the constraints and responsibilities we have fiscally as an organization with HR and the future needs that we would have of staffing and the obligations that might come there. Security and safety, I think every one of our facilities, that's an important piece of it. And communications, how we're interacting with the communities, both in the development and planning and the other sometimes communities that we look past, not intentionally, but there's a lot of underserved communities that are relying on transit, and how we're engaging them as part of our due diligence and process and bringing them into this opportunity. So we felt like a modified structure and some changing of some titles and some positions. We had some positions, for example, that indicated vice president. We no longer have a president, and so these are just bring things in alignment and consistency. We also felt like it was important to adopt our salary structure. The salary structure, from a practical standpoint, has been used in our HR practices, and it's not uncommon for public agencies to have adopted salary structures, and for that to be apparent and where positions fall and what the ranges of those positions would be. It doesn't change the current salaries of any individuals, but it may as they approach the high end of those ranges, unless the ranges are adjusted for market, could bring them to a position where it wouldn't increase their base salary. But that's true in other salary structures of public agencies. And one of the things that employees have to take into account as they look at their position or new opportunities even in the organization. But we felt like, and then tasking the executive director to oversee those day-to-day operations as while we as a board look at our outward function. As part of that, we've are shifting the government relations portion and the internal audit function, reporting to the board, as well as our strategic board operations, the legal services and civil rights compliance would report to the executive director in this particular aspect. And some may ask, well, why now you haven't hired an executive director? Well, it's fair to somebody who's going through that hiring process to know what the expectation of management is of that position, so they know what they're hiring into, and that's an acceptable thing. Would there ever be any changes in the future? Potentially. I think any organization, as they have needs and other discussions come up, you have those conversations, and if there's changes needed down the road, then we'll make changes. But we wanted to adopt this by ordinance so that it was clear both to those who have established our current governance structure and to those underneath us that this is the direction that we wanted to go as a board. Let me maybe just see if Trustee Holbrook wanted to offer any comments, and then also go to Steve Meyer if he wanted to make any particular comments. Beth?
Mr. Chair, thank you very much for the opportunity on this. As he mentioned, as Christensen mentioned, we took an opportunity when we first became involved to really go through a lot of the different, almost all of the different departments. I believe we've now had an opportunity to really kind of get a feel for their structure and understand where their role is in terms of this scenario. And one of the things that that we learned is that there's a lot of good structure that's in place, and there's areas that, as was mentioned, could always be improved upon. And I think with this structure, excuse me, this is going to allow us to implement not only the new governance structure as it exists for the trustees in the three trustees for the different areas within the valley, but also to allow us to better integrate where we're seeing different areas, for instance, in service or in capital growth or in TOD, any of these areas, and how we can communicate that in an even more effective strategy long term. I really feel that when I met with the governor for this particular role, one of the things that I thought really came to me and came across is what a value this would be, and that's the transparency and the communications. I am of the opinion that communications cannot be done adequately enough, and we always want to make sure that we are connecting with our partners, with our stakeholders, and with the public in general in a way that's explaining and hopefully getting more information out there while still being able to effectively manage an organization of this nature. I commend all of the departments and as to how much information that they gave us when we first met with them. It was a really great opportunity, and it really gave me a perspective of, I know that there are a lot of people in these various departments who really just are so passionate about transportation and what their particular role is at UTA, and we want to continue to encourage that and implement that or take advantage of it, if you will, because that's a real value to the organization as a whole. As it relates to the executive director's role, I do want to emphasize again the value of making sure that we have a governance structure that is fully compliant with what's required now, as well as giving that individual the opportunity to understand what it is that their expectations will be moving forward. And so we do intend to make sure that that is a component of that, the management and the structure that exists on a day-to-day basis, knowing that there's always fluidity in that particular role. And that communication with the executive director and with the trustees is going to be very, very, very valuable moving forward. And as we see in our roles, one of the things that I would say was of real value is the opportunity for me to be able to understand Utah County and their needs, as well as Salt Lake County. In my instance, I'm a little more well-versed in Davis and Weber. And I think that is, I know for a fact that the other trustees are equally excited and wanting to engage in those areas, because it's a way for us to get the information from our area, but then to implement it and integrate it into a regional perspective. So I wanted to thank everyone who worked so hard to get us to this area and to where we are at today. And I feel like we went through a really thorough and thoughtful process. And it's never, it's never perfect, I guess you can say, which is why there's always the potential to make some integration changes down the road. But we wanted to make sure that we were doing this right and doing this in a way that's going to be effective long term. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Steve, did you want to take a minute and make any comments?
Thank you, Chair. I really do appreciate the time and effort that the trustees have put into this, to meeting with all the folks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Your efforts in getting out in the field and meeting with the departments and the staff in Frontlines headquarters, getting to understand the organization, and then our time with our management consultant working through this process. I think this will really set the stage and give a good understanding to my successor, the new executive director, and point us on a good path forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Motion, I would note that we had a minor change in some titles as part of the salary structure aspect, and it was just really making them concurrent or in agreement to the organizational structure that you see on the screen today, and doesn't change any salary ranges or the structure of how we're looking at that. So that's just a minor modification to what we had in our packet. With that, I'll entertain a motion on the resolution.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve R 2019-01-01, our first one, establishing the authority's organizational structure, appointing officers, and setting compensation for district officers and employees. And the amended version that was being referenced is actually dated from today, so it's 1/9 of 2019. And that's what fixes some of the title changes that didn't get addressed. But other than that, it's in essence the same document. So.
Second, with that,
Sorry.
go roll call on this.
Trustee Holbrook?
Aye.
Trustee Christensen?
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to all those, in particular, Kim Uliberry, thank you for you and your staff. It's a lot of work, and I'm sure underappreciated. But thank you for all the effort over the last couple months. Next is consideration of a resolution authorizing the purchase of real property, and we'll invite Paul Drake to come forward and talk about that particular item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello again. I'm here to talk about a parcel 140. So although UVX down in Utah County is operational, we've got a team who's hard at work finishing up the remaining land acquisitions. I'd like to recognize Gail Padgett, who's in the crowd. She has done an excellent job. She's our contractor and an expert right-of-way acquisition agent. She's done an excellent job on this one. This has been a difficult one, as I'll explain. The team has finished negotiations on this parcel, parcel 140. It's located at 165 East University Parkway in Orem, in front of a car dealership. we're bringing it in front of the board because the final negotiated price is above $200,000. We're purchasing some fee property that's shown in the red, labeled acquisition, a small perpetual easement, and then a construction easement, which is temporary. The seller is Garf Properties in Orem. The purpose, of course, is the Utah County BRT project. The interest that we're purchasing is just over 7,000 square feet of fee property, 36 square feet of a perpetual easement, and just over 3,000 square feet for a temporary construction easement. UTA's appraisal came in at $176,900, and the landowner's appraisal came in at above that at nearly $200,000. Now you'll see at the bottom the purchase price was $218,000, which is higher than either appraisal. So you might wonder why we got to that. It turns out that these negotiations, as you know, are fluid. At this particular location, there were 3 affected parcels. The landowner, the seller, was improving his property at the time, and that was complicated by the BRT construction, and so it added additional cost to what he had to do. Those costs were verified by the BRT team and found to be acceptable. And then they were significantly more than what's shown here as the administrative settlement, but those costs were allocated over those 3 parcels, parcel 120, 140, and 143. The portion that was allocated to this parcel, along with some adjustments for time in the schedule, I guess, when the appraisal came in, and some other adjustments, came to $41,502 for the ultimate administrative settlement. We feel that that is a fair settlement, and it is a fair negotiation with us and the landowner. So we request that the board approve the purchases described, that it approve the right-of-way contract that was included in the packet, and then authorize the executive director to execute that transaction. Any questions?
I have none. Do you have any, Beth?
Paul, I just had a couple questions.
You bet.
The first question I just wanted to understand, so this will complete this transaction in entirety on this particular issue, or are there, because of the construction that's going to be, I'm assuming a rather temporary scenario, is there going to be anything further that's going to be required of this, or is this going to be a finite ending solution on this?
This will be the final one for this parcel. Like I mentioned, there are other parcels that were included in that overall impact, and those ones will probably come to the board later. We are seeking FTA approval on one of those, but for this parcel, this would finalize it, and we could execute it on this transaction.
And is it still I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Is it still following in the original budget of the acquisition anticipation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So just to clarify, the administrative cost portion of this is to help to manage those costs that were incurred by the landowner as a result of his increased construction delays. Is that basically a fair way to say that?
Delays and adjustments is what I understand. Yep.
Well,
Thank you, that's all.
Seeing no other questions, entertain a motion to approve the resolution.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve Resolution 2019-01-02, authorizing the purchase of real property on parcels 140B.
Second, we'll go to roll call.
Trustee Holbrook,
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. We're next on to item 11 on our agenda for contracts, disbursements, and change orders. And first one up is Eddie Cummins on regards to our on-call maintenance with Stacy and Whitbeck.
Thank you, Chair.
This is a task order for the removal and reconstruction of the 150 South main tracks interlocking. Change order value is $942,716. That would bring the total contract value to $27,979,066. The interlocking system allows the trains to switch tracks, so going from one over and crosses. In this area of 150 South Main, the rails, switches, frogs, and concrete are badly worn and require replacement. Project will include the removal of the 20-year-old track work. This is a state of good repair project in the 2019 budget and is the first of two interlocking projects we plan to do this year. We expect to begin work in April, and the project will bring the interlocking and signaling up to current standards and allow for more efficient train movements. Any questions?
No, sadly, this was like a nostalgic thing because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but during the Olympics, it was what allowed the trains to switch direction because they couldn't go through the Metals Plaza area,
right?
If I'm remembering right.
But
which is really a sad commentary in my life. but the one question I had is the work itself going to be done like when they're doing the half union or?
No, it'll be done at a different time. So we're planning to do the half union in May. So this will be done before that. Okay. What we plan to do right now, the current plan is that we'll do this over 4 weekends. And so that will allow the trains to continue to single track through those sections. So we'll just do one switch at a time.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. Any questions?
No questions.
Let's see. I guess we'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the contract change order, the on-call maintenance as presented by staff.
Second. And roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thanks. Next item, item B, is a change order regarding records management systems with Cities Digital. Kim?
Thank you. As you mentioned, this is a change order on a current contract for some new features on our records management system, which is Laserfiche. The total amount of the change order is for $84,866. That brings the total contract value to $400,141. And the initial budget for this project was actually about $500,000, and so this keeps us completely under budget for this project. But in 2017, we did roll out our first phase of our new records management system, and we knew going into the next phases that we would need some additional features to help with efficiencies and effectiveness. So really, these are for additional licenses in different departments, auto population field features that allow us to automate things, and DocuSign to allow us to use electronic signature on some workflows and such as that.
I signed my first workflow the other day. Has the system been running as hoped for, I assume?
Yeah, I think we're really pleased with the system. There's a significant number of features that are helpful, especially in moving from our old system. Of course, we've moved a lot of data in that transition, so the records management staff, Audie, is working hard to just, clean up some of those errors, but we're really happy and pleased with it so far.
Kim, when would this be fully integrated into our system?
I don't have an exact timeline in front of me on phase 2 and 3. I think, Audie, do you have any data? I mean, we're continually using new features within it, so you could kind of say our first major move is almost in completion. But do you want to give that time?
Right. So, thank you. So we migrated our old system SIRE over completely, and the people who had access to SIRE and specific what they called cabinets folders have access to those records still. They're just not adding to that repository. We have a new structure that is better and meant for retention and things of that nature, and that has also rolled out to everybody who has access to that system. We're seeing a good response. So I'm guessing by the end of this year we should be fully integrated into the new repository system, and moving forward with actually turning on retention and moving forward with all the responsibilities and regulations that we adhere to.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, I'll entertain a motion on this particular contract.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the change order for the records management system with Cities Digital.
Second, go to roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Last item on contracts is security services for fares collection, and have Monica Morton with us today.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So this is a contract approval for Allied Universal over 5 years, approximately $449,000. We have cash that we collect off of the TVM, and we do have an armed service guard go out with each of our collectors, and so this contract is being renewed, and we're asking for approval so that we can continue to protect them as they provide services to collect our cash.
So the only question I had, and I think I know the answer, but why don't you use our own police? I guess the question when you go to do collection, is it just less expensive?
It is less expensive, and obviously they're overqualified. So it's not, we can look into it, but I don't think that, yeah, I think they're overqualified.
Okay. Well,
but I'm happy to look into it and
yeah,
consider.
I mean, is the contract for a year, or what's the?
It's 5 years.
5 years contract. Is it an automatic for full 5, or?
No, it's we'll have to go out for RFP again after 5 years.
Okay, but I guess the question is, could it be canceled?
It could, yes. We do have a termination clause in there. So if we determine between now and then that there is a better option in-house, absolutely. Yeah. But I will make note of that to at least do a comparison and some pros and cons.
Yeah, I don't want the collectors not out there by their own.
Right.
You know, that would be a huge mistake. But and I don't want to pull police away from, you know, what I would call public safety responsibilities. But sometimes if they're on site or they're going to be there anyway, you know, is there some synergies that could be gained? And I just would love to know some kind of analysis of what that would entail and whether there'd even be appetite for it. So.
Absolutely, I will.
All right. If no other questions, I'll entertain a motion on this particular contract.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the contract for security services for fare collections with Allied Universal, which is a 5-year contract this time.
Second, go to roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Monica. We'll go to any pre-procurement items with Steve Meyer on the phone.
Thank you, Chair. We have one item of pre-procurement that staff is now working through the procurement process, and that is replacement of the TC1 timekeeping software in our JDE management system. So our accounting group will be leading that effort. We'll do a best value procurement for that, and we're estimating a contract value of $680,000. The system is used by about 500 employees to record their time, and the system will include JDE support to tie in with the rest of the management system and some upgrade of our support, timekeeping and scheduling software, and IT and electronic infrastructure. So you'll see that in the coming months. Thank you.
And if I remember right, Bob, that was in our 2019 budget. Is that?
That is correct.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. We'll next go to discussion items and transit-oriented development process. And Paul Drake. Paul, we should just rent a seat there for you. But you're getting your exercise in, so.
All right, thank you, trustees and Mr. Chair. Not sure how this goes. I guess it's kind of a new thing to have an open discussion about some of the things that we're working on. What I've brought to discuss today is the TOD process, how we get from planning or kind of a regional look down to how do we select sites and how do we select developers and move it through to construction. We have had some changes recently, as you may be aware, in the state statute and our organization. Back in March, the board approved what's called the TOD strategic plan and an accompanying policy. And those have had to be revised due to the organizational changes and just some requirements through the state statute. So we've been working through those revisions, and I've brought those here. It looks like you got the handout. And so the first handout that we have, we don't have it to display for the crowd. Okay. But the first handout that you have there, trustees, is the TOD process. It might look a little complicated, but if I could just point out some things, it might simplify the way you interpret it. So there are three main stages of the TOD process. It starts with planning, implementation, and management. A little history on that is that the way that we started out the TOD program, we would select a site and then immediately go out for RFP to select a development partner. And that development partner was expected to guide us through the development process, tell us what they felt was the highest and best use, work with the city to push through that design, and basically a traditional development pattern. We were criticized for a couple of different reasons. One is how do you select sites? You know, what puts one site over another? Are you just picking sites that somebody wants?
Paul, it should probably be noted that at this point the legislature has allowed us 8 sites and 5 are committed to at this point, right?
Correct. Yep.
We really only unless they make some modifications, we only have 3 sites we can consider in this process.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. We did start off with 5. It was kind of a pilot program that the legislature started back in 2010. The limit has been raised to 8, as you pointed out. Okay. Anyway, and then the other criticism was just how do you select developers? Now, we wanted to create a process that was open, transparent, and included regional partners, communities themselves, neighbors, and really put UTA, the communities, and the region back in the driver's seat of what happens at TOD sites. So to move along in the process, the next level down from those main stages are the phases of the TOD project. Those are the darker boxes that you see there. The first one is the TOD system analysis. These processes go from a large regional scale down to site-specific, project-specific details. So TOD system analysis is a regional look at all of the properties, the stations that UTA owns and could potentially be a future TOD project. It's a prioritization tool. We talked about that in an earlier agenda item. The prioritization tool is based off of objective criteria that have been identified through a stakeholder group. This tool is put together by a joint it's called the Joint Projects Committee, with representatives from the MPOs, the Metropolitan Planning Organizations of Wasatch Front Regional Council, Mountain Land Association of Governments, UDOT, UTA, and has input from a consultant from the University of Utah, as well as several other stakeholders. So that tool will help us to see what the readiness of all of our sites are. and be able to rank that and inform board decisions on site selection. The next would be station area plans. These are plans that we work with the communities, neighborhood groups, other stakeholders as needed to take a look at the area around each potential station, generally a half a mile around each station, and then it's defined further based on need. But that's a process that is done before developer selection on purpose. We try to identify the community's vision, see how that marries with UTA's vision and the regional growth plan, Wasatch Choice for 2040, soon to be 2050, and then kind of synthesize those objectives into one cohesive plan that's reviewed and adopted by the city, and is by statute approved by the local advisory board and the board of trustees. The next one is conceptual layout and procurement. This is where we select sites and developers. The criteria for selecting the site are based off of that prioritization tool. Of course, it's the board's prerogative how to interpret the information from that tool, and the board ultimately selects the site. The criteria for selecting development partners is derived from the station area plan and the input that was gained from the communities, neighborhood stakeholder groups. We want to identify first in the station area plan what is appropriate for the site, what would fulfill the city's and UTA's vision for that site, and then pick an appropriate development partner that would be able to implement that effectively. The next stage is the master plan. After we've selected a developer, we work with them over the next, usually it's 18 months, based on the terms of a negotiated exclusive negotiations agreement that has set deadlines, milestones, to try and get us to a master plan and an ultimate agreement between UTA and the developer. That master plan is basically looking at all of the property in aggregate. Some of our properties we have very, very little, so it might be one phase. Other properties are very large. We have one in the system that's 60 acres, so it will likely be developed out in several phases. So that master plan looks at it as a whole to make sure that we have guidance throughout each individual phase of development. When individual phases of development are identified, we work with the developer on site design. So we get down to the actual building footprint, the architectural design, what is specific to those particular buildings within the phase, and the associated infrastructure. That is accompanied by a financial analysis, pro formas. How do we expect that asset or that phase to perform over time, and what does that mean for the agency? What is the agency expected to get out of its investment? Those are brought to the board again. I'm sorry, I skipped one. The master plan is approved by the Board of Trustees. So the idea here is that the board is in charge of the process. There are key decision-making points throughout this process that will guide the rest. At every single one of those, it's a check-in, review, and approval by the Board of Trustees. So the master plan, again, when we look at it as a whole, we want to make sure that the board is in agreement and that and they are okay with that direction. Then we move forward with individual phases. As we do that and we receive that financial analysis, we get to see what are the terms of that particular phase of development, who are the investors, so that we can screen those for any conflicts of interest. And then assuming that all of that is consistent with board objectives, the board can approve that and we move forward with construction. We convey whatever is the appropriate property interest at that time. Some of the projects that we have, we've actually conveyed the land and received capital account credit in a joint venture. Some of them we've conveyed leasehold rights, so a ground lease to the entity, and then they could hold it for 99 years or whatever period that we negotiate. And then we move into construction and then property management. Construction is self-explanatory. We do our best to protect the transit critical elements of each site. A lot of these are right on, active stations. So we want to protect our patrons. We want to protect our assets. We want to make sure that the operations continue smoothly. And so that is those are our main objectives during that phase. And then as the properties come online and are occupied, we manage the agreements and make sure that the terms are met, that the obligations are to UTA are met, and that we receive appropriate cash flows according to those terms. Any questions so far on the process?
Paul, I just had a question. In terms of the process, and as you mentioned, planning, the station area plan has the board approval, but I think maybe talk about the advisory board's role on how that could impact this.
Yeah, absolutely. So as mentioned before, the state statute requires the local advisory board approve any plans, any TOD plans. The local advisory board meets not as often as the board of trustees, meets periodically, and it's my understanding that the purpose of that board is the very high level direction. We get inputs from all of those communities and stakeholders on that local advisory board. And so what we want to do is seek their guidance right at the first. So bring that effort that has been done, again, with the community and all the stakeholders that have an interest in that station area, and bring that to the local advisory board for advice, for review, and hopefully for approval. What that does is that gives direction for all future phases of that particular project. So they'll be able to see, what uses are appropriate on the site. What should the circulation be? What is UTA's role in improving the site, or the community's role in improving the site prior to going out for RFP? We have in those station area plans what are called strategic recommendations. Basically what those are is to identify where we want to be, and how does that relate to where we are on the site, and what are the gaps, what are the obstacles to getting to where we want to go, and then identify key tasks that the community and UTA and other stakeholders can do to address those gaps, to really prepare the site. Now, those things are all going to be presented to the local advisory board and the board of trustees. And again, the idea is to get direction from that local advisory board about where we're going. If they like that direction, if not, we can go back and adjust accordingly. Anyway, does that answer your question, or you have further questions?
No, that answers my question. I just kind of wanted to have a perspective of how the advisory board's role is implemented within this, and what that can mean for any TOD site. So thank you.
Maybe along that same line of questioning, Paul, we get a lot of interest from different folks that are interested in sites that UTA may have. And really, if I'm following this correctly, our next step is to present I'm going to want to make sure I call it the process to the advisory board, and they're scheduled for their meeting next week. And they may want, understandably, may want time to consider the process, or, go to a second meeting. But really, that has to take place before you can run the other parts of the process through it, correct?
That's correct. And if
So
I
it's
can,
clear.
I've got another handout that shows kind of a proposed timeline. It points out, like you were mentioning, that there are key steps that we need to go through, and a particular timeline. So if I could come and
Sure.
those out to you.
We'll make sure if there's any others that want a copy of this, we'll make sure we get that for them.
I've got 8 more copies if anybody wants them. Okay, but anyway, if we could walk through that briefly.
We may have 8 takers.
So the first item is, as you know, is today, January 9th. We are discussing the TOD policy and the process. Through the 23rd, we expect to have robust discussions and then come to the advisory board and then ultimately the board of trustees for approval of these changes to the policy. Again, I would like to point out that the board did approve the strategic plan and a policy back in March, and the changes that have been made are basically to just align us with the new organization. But that will be discussed. That will be discussed with the local advisory board and with the board of trustees prior to approval. We feel that we can have a discussion about the TOD system analysis tool by the end of the month. We've been working hard with those stakeholders in the Joint Projects Committee and others to get that wrapped up. We've identified what we feel are the right criteria, and have a proposal for weighting of those criteria, but we would like to get some input from the board. So we intend to bring that for discussion later this month. We also have a lot of station area plans. We haven't been sitting back on our heels. We've been working hard with these communities and getting station area plans ready, preparing those sites for potential development in the future if the board so chooses. We'll be bringing those station area plans hopefully to the local advisory board, so they will have been able to look at the policy in January, probably when they meet again in March, be able to bring those station area plans to them for consideration.
If they were to meet we don't know how often they're going to want to meet. That's certainly up to them. Mm-hmm. We've proposed some things, but if they want to meet in February, there's nothing that would keep them from sort of moving that part of it along faster. Are you prepared for that, or if they wanted to?
I think a lot of them will be prepared by February. Some of them will not. Some of them might be close. Sure. But we'll bring whichever ones that were ready at the time when the board or when the local advisory board wants to take a look at them.
Okay.
Now, to that point, the station area plan is one of the key components that makes a site eligible for selection. It's one of the criteria in that site prioritization tool, but it is also a requirement based on policy that it has to be done before we can move forward on a development. So we need to keep that in mind, and I think we personally would like to see as many communities eligible for that selection as possible. So we'll work diligently to get those prepared for whenever the local advisory board is ready to hear them. Moving on in the agenda, the next week we expect that the Board of Trustees would be able to approve those station area plans and have their own review of it, and then they would be able to see the results of the system analysis tool. So if I get back up to the end of this month, we'll talk about the tool in general. What are the criteria and what is the weighting, and try and get some input from the board on a conceptual level. If the board agrees with the direction on what those criteria are and that they're weighted appropriately for the board's objectives, and then we'll come back March 20th with where that lands as far as the tool goes, and start seeing results, how individual station areas are ranked. Within a week, we would meet again with the board and be able to select the sites. So we'll have a robust conversation on the 20th about what information is coming out of that analysis tool, and that should inform decisions from the board. Have a week to think about it, and then come back and have decisions on which sites, if the board so chooses, that we want to move forward to RFPs. We'll be prepared as staff to move forward on RFPs if the board does select sites and authorizes us to move forward. We'll be prepared to issue those within just a couple of days, and then give the proposers, any of the development teams that are interested, roughly 30 days to respond. After that, when we receive the proposals, we feel that the selection committee could review those and be ready to select a development partner within a week. And then once we select a development partner, we would negotiate with them the terms of an exclusive negotiation agreement, which would govern our relationship through master development agreement. Any questions?
Any questions?
So just so that I can understand this structurally and so we can kind of communicate that out, in terms of the locations of the various sites that would be eligible based on all of the established, the planning and et cetera, how does that get communicated to our community partners on that? And is there a pretty simple process that they can use to get this information so that they understand the timelines and how they're structured?
Well, the policy and the process are on our website. This is a proposed schedule. We have been working with all of the communities that we're currently doing station area plans with and keeping them up to date on this tentative schedule. Staff, we're not in charge of the decisions the board makes, and so we have to throw in that caveat in those conversations. But we have communicated to those communities that we are trying to be ready for the local advisory board approval to approve and make those station area plans final and make those sites eligible for selection. We've given them basic dates on when we expect that to happen. So it's available in concept online, and we have circulated that process with the communities involved, and then to try to give them as much idea, the best that staff could guess, on how the schedule is going to play out.
So the structure of the advisory board's role, et cetera, has been communicated to any entity that has come to you and said, hey, I have a project idea type of scenario. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you.
So our next step is really to present this planned or this process to the advisory board on a week from today. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep. And the associated changes. We do have a policy, and it's my understanding that we're going to be changing the way policies work. Our old policy was an executive limitations policy, which is basically thou shalt not fail to, blah, blah, blah. But then the new policy is a lot more, it follows this process significantly easier for somebody to follow. So that will be presented to the local advisory board and the board of trustees as well.
Okay, great.
Sure.
Thanks for that update. Appreciate you and your staff's work on it. Our next item is just other business, and Beth, you want to give us an update on the Utah County Service Level Agreement?
I would love to. Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I first started in this role, there were some discussions in the Utah County area in regards to what the service agreement could look like that had just been signed, I believe, in September of 2018 with Utah County. And one of those dialogues was to incorporate a service agreement that would be specific should the fourth quarter become implemented. And in discussions with the commissioners as well as with other entities in terms of the communities involved, et cetera, we started to initiate the process. The commissioners in December voted to implement the fourth quarter, which structurally is going to look something like this. Basically, the fourth quarter is going to allow for some level of payment back to the BRT costs that were initiated for UVX. And as that goes down, it's going to be roughly 2028 before there'll be some revenue available for a service plan agreement to be implemented, either to increase service or to look at other areas. And so what I have been doing, and then I have also been bringing Trustee-elect Commissioner Kent Millington with me on some of these. And basically the discussion has gone very similar to what we saw implemented for the TOD side, which is basically a structure that shows here's how this process is going to work. We have initiated the steps that show the community involvement and the engagement, and I apologize I don't have it on here, but I'll get it out as soon as we can. And it's basically looking at it from how we're going to take this money and implement it from roughly 2028 moving forward. It also talked about what that service agreement is going to look like, what it's going to address. One of the key components that Utah County wanted to have is they wanted to understand some of the data that they were talking about with ridership, et cetera, and they wanted to have that implemented as well, and that's part of the discussion. At the Utah County has a new commissioner-elect. Well, now he's Commissioner Ainge, and he is also being brought up to speed on this as well. And the implementation process is similar to the TOD in the sense that the advisory board has to take a look at the process that's going to be outlined and approve it in order for us to implement this type of decision. So it's going to follow along very similar lines, and this is going to be presented in detail at, I believe it's our the meeting next week. So I'll have all of the flow charts, et cetera, available. But I just wanted to kind of update everyone on the steps that we've taken in Utah County thus far. And I have been very, very enthusiastic, and I've really been excited at how this process has gone out with Utah County, working with the commissioners and working with the local elected officials in that area and with MAG as well. So Trustee-elect Millington is probably going to be he's going to be the local expert on this moving forward, but we've been integrating him in this process, and we'll update you next week on that. So just wanted to bring that.
Thanks. I understand you've become the official adopted daughter of Utah County, but
they're already looking for property for me. No, just kidding.
But we
find me a house.
we appreciate your efforts there, and I know they're looking forward to working with Kent as well. So thank you for that update. Our next meeting is a week from today on January the 16th. We had scheduled a closed session. We're going to postpone that to a next meeting. And so with that, I'll call for a motion for adjournment.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn.
All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Aye. We'll stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. I was expecting...